5 in the morning is usually the quietest time of day, but that morning, the click of the front door lock sounded like a gunshot. My sister walked into the kitchen wearing a look of unearned victory, her husband trailing behind her like a shadow. She did not say hello. She just scanned the room I had paid for and said, "Pack your things within 48 hours because this house is ours now." My name is Kayla Mitchell. I am 32 years old. I live in the quiet, rain-washed suburbs of Eugene, Oregon, and I work as a data analyst for a company called North Cascade Systems. To the Census Bureau, I am a single female professional. To my bank, I am a low-risk borrower with impeccable credit. But to the people standing in my kitchen right now, I am apparently nothing more than an obstacle that has finally been cleared. I do not lack money. What I lack, as I stared at the three faces I was supposed to trust most in this world, is the truth. It was 5 in the morning. This was usually my sacred hour. The world outside was still draped in the heavy, wet darkness typical of the Pacific Northwest, a silence so thick it felt like a protective blanket. I was sitting at the kitchen island, the granite surface cool under my forearms. My laptop was open, casting a pale blue glow across the room, and a mug of black coffee sat to my right, steam rising in a perfect, undisturbed column. This routine was the one thing I controlled absolutely. I woke up before the sun because it was the only time the house felt like it belonged to me, before the ghosts of obligation and passive-aggressive comments woke up to fill the hallways. Then the lock tumbled. It was not the fumbling scratch of a key finding its way home in the dark. It was a sharp, practiced click. The front door swung open, letting in a draft of damp morning air. My younger sister, Brianna, stepped across the threshold as if she were walking onto a stage where she had directed every light. Miles, her husband, trailed behind her. Brianna looked impeccable, which was jarring for such an ungodly hour. She wore a trench coat that cinched tightly at her waist, and the scent of her perfume, something floral and aggressively expensive, drifted into the kitchen, instantly warring with the smell of my coffee. It was a smell I associated with department store counters and desperation. Miles looked less assured. He wore a stiff leather jacket and kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. He had the cheap attitude of a man who was borrowing confidence from his wife. Brianna did not say hello. She did not ask why I was up. She simply stopped in the center of the living room, which flowed openly into the kitchen, and began to scan the space. Her eyes lingered on the sectional sofa I had purchased last winter. She looked at the mounted television. She looked at the curtains. It was not a look of appreciation. It was an appraisal. She was counting inventory. Then she turned her gaze to me. Her expression was flat, devoid of the warmth one might expect for a sister she had not seen in 6 months. "Pack your things within 48 hours, she said. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "This house is ours now." I did not move. I did not close my laptop. I simply took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the heat burn my tongue. It was a grounding sensation. Pain is data. Pain tells you you are alive. Before I could respond, my mother emerged from the hallway leading to the master bedroom. She must have been awake, waiting for the signal. She pulled her robe tighter around her small frame, her face arranging itself into that familiar mask of pained benevolence. It was the look she always wore right before she asked me to bleed for the family. "Kayla," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. Her hands fluttered uselessly in front of her. "Your sister has a plan. She needs stability. You know how it is. You are always alone. You do not need all this space just for yourself." The logic was breathtaking, because I was single, I was disposable, because I was self-sufficient. I was expected to provide for those who were not. I felt a stinging sensation behind my eyes, but I forced it down. I am a data analyst. I look for patterns. I look for the story the numbers tell, not the story people shout, and the numbers here did not add up. I set my mug down on the counter. The ceramic made a solid thud against the stone. I looked past my mother, past the preening victory on Brianna's face, and focused on the fourth person in the room. My father was standing in the shadows of the hallway door. He had not moved since Brianna entered. He was holding his own coffee cup, the blue ceramic one with the chipped rim that I had washed 1,000 times. His knuckles were stark white. Straining against the handle, he was not looking at me. He was staring fixedly at the floorboards. His shoulders hunched in a posture I recognized immediately. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated terror. I turned my eyes back to Brianna and Miles. I kept my voice incredibly soft. Silence is often louder than shouting. So, I asked, leaning forward slightly, who is currently paying the mortgage attached to this house? The air in the room seemed to freeze. The smirk faltered on Brianna's lips. She blinked. Once, twice, this question was clearly not in the script she had written for this morning. She glanced sharply at Miles. Miles, who had been inspecting the crown molding, suddenly found the tips of his boots fascinating. He shifted his weight, looking distinctly uncomfortable. They did not know. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They thought the house was free and clear. They thought they were walking into an inheritance, an asset they could liquidate or leverage. They had no idea about the debt. They had no idea about the second mortgage my parents had taken out 5 years ago to cover a bad investment, or the fact that I had stepped in to stop the foreclosure. My father flinched. I saw it. It was a small movement, a tightening of his jaw. But it confirmed everything. He had lied to them. Or rather, he had omitted the truth to keep his golden child happy, throwing me under the bus to pave her road. I looked at my mother. She refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at the refrigerator door as if the family photos stuck there held the secrets to the universe. I took a breath. I could scream. I could pull up the bank statements on my laptop right now and show them the thousands of dollars that left my account every month to keep a roof over their heads. I could show them the receipts for the washer, the dryer, the table they were leaning against, but I didn't. If I screamed, I was just the jealous older sister. If I fought, I was the hysterical spinster refusing to help her family. I needed to be something else. I needed to be the analyst. 48 hours, I said. My voice was so calm it sounded foreign to my own ears. Brianna's eyes narrowed. She had expected a fight. She had come ready for a war, and I had just surrendered the castle before the first shot was fired. It unsettled her. I nodded slowly. I agree. I will be gone in 48 hours. I closed my laptop with a gentle snap. I stood up, taking my mug with me. I walked past them, threading the needle between Brianna and the counter. I could smell the stale alcohol under her expensive perfume, the scent of a celebration that had happened the night before. They had toasted to their victory before they even walked through the door. As I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, I could feel their eyes on my back. They were confused. They were likely wondering why it had been this easy. Let them wonder. Inside my head, the shock was already receding, replaced by the cold, humming machinery of my profession. I was not leaving in defeat. I was initiating a project. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. Asset map, timeline, proof of ownership. The file names scrolled through my mind. I was not going to break plates or cut the cords on the television. That was amateur. That was emotional. I was going to execute an extraction so precise, so legally watertight, that by the time they realized what had happened, they would be standing in an empty shell of a house with a bank notice in the mailbox. They wanted the house. They could have the house, but they had forgotten to ask what made it a home, and they certainly had not asked who owned the things inside it. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set a timer. 47 hours and 59 minutes remaining. The game had started, and they did not even know the rules. This house does not feel like other houses in Eugene. Most of the properties in this subdivision are boxes of drywall and stucco erected in the 90s. Soulless things that smell of vinyl and stale air, but this place is different. My grandfather, Warren, built the frame of this house with his own hands 60 years ago. He selected the timber himself, Douglas fir that he hauled down from the Cascades in an old flatbed truck when the wind blows hard from the coast. The house groans. It is not a sound of weakness. It is the sound of the wood settling, a deep, resonant creak that used to make me feel safe when I was a child. I used to imagine it was Grandpa Warren breathing, holding the roof up with his shoulders so we could sleep. That feeling of safety evaporated 5 years ago. Though I was too blind to notice it vanishing until today, I sat on my bed, the silence of the room pressing against my ears. I needed to remember exactly how this trap had been set. It started with a kitchen table conversation, the kind that ruins lives quietly over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. My parents had sat me down, faces pale, hands trembling. They had invested their retirement savings and a significant portion of their liquid cash into a private equity scheme run by a friend from church. It was a guaranteed return. They said it was foolproof. It was a Ponzi scheme. The money was gone. But worse than the lost cash was the fact that they had secretly refinanced the house to buy into the deal. They had taken a home that was fully paid off, a legacy from Grandpa Warren, and leveraged it to the hilt. Now, the bank was calling. Foreclosure was not a distant threat. It was a letter sitting on the counter. I was 27. I had just been promoted at North Cascade Systems. I had a 5-year plan that involved buying a condo in the Pearl District, getting a dog, and finally living a life that did not involve managing my parents' emotions. But they looked so small that night. My mother cried, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. My father stared at the wall. A broken man. We will lose the legacy. My mother had sobbed, Grandpa's house, so I stepped in. They promised me that if I took over the payments, if I saved the house, they would transfer the deed to me eventually. It was a verbal contract signed in tears and guilt. I believed them because that is what you do with family. You believe the lie because the truth is too painful to look at. I canceled my meetings with real estate agents. I took the down payment I had scraped together for my condo and dumped it into their arrears to stop the foreclosure. Then, I became a machine. I took every extra project North Cascade threw at me. I worked weekends. I worked holidays. I spent my 20s staring at spreadsheets and SQL databases so that I could write a check every month for $2,400 to keep a roof over their heads. I looked around my bedroom. The walls were painted a soft gray, a color I had chosen. I remembered buying the paint. I remembered buying the roller brushes. My mind began to walk through the rest of the house, cataloging the space not as a home, but as a warehouse of my expenditures. The living room downstairs was furnished with a sectional sofa I bought 3 years ago for $1,800 because my mother complained her back hurt on the old one. The 65-inch television mounted on the wall was a Christmas gift I purchased because my father wanted to watch the Ducks play in high definition. The dining table where Brianna had just leaned her hip was solid mahogany. I paid for it. The refrigerator, a stainless steel double-door model that dispensed crushed ice, was mine. The high-efficiency washer and dryer set in the mudroom was mine. I had receipts for all of it. For years. I told myself their thank yous were genuine. I told myself that the cooked meals and the roof over my head were a fair trade, but looking back now, with the clarity that only betrayal can provide, I saw the pattern. It was not gratitude. It was consumption. They had eaten my savings. They had eaten my future. And now that they had found a new host in Brianna and Miles, they were spitting me out. Brianna. She had been gone for nearly 4 years. She left town in a beat-up Honda Civic with a guy named Kyle, leaving a note saying she was suffocating in this town. We heard nothing for months at a time. Occasionally, she would call asking for money, $500 here for a car repair, $300 there for rent. I usually sent it. Then, 6 months ago, she reappeared with Miles, wearing a diamond ring and driving a leased SUV. She spoke vaguely about Miles's business and logistics. She acted as if she had won a race we did not know we were running. Her return was too smooth, and this morning was too choreographed. Pack your things within 48 hours. That phrasing bothered me. Brianna was not precise. Brianna was the type of person who rounded numbers up and forgot appointments. 48 hours is a legal term. It is the language of eviction notices and custody battles. It is specific. It implies a deadline with consequences. Brianna did not come up with that number on her own. and Miles, who looked like he struggled to read a menu. Certainly did not draft this plan. Someone had handed them a script. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop again. The screen flickered to life, the white light stark in the dim room. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it Journal or Feelings. I named it Project Eviction. Inside, I created a spreadsheet. I forced my hands to stop trembling. I forced the burning sensation in my chest to cool down into a hard, dense knot. I am a data analyst. My job is to find the truth buried in millions of rows of chaotic information. I do not guess. I verify. I typed the first header, Asset Map. Under it, I began to list every single item in the house that I had purchased. Item description, date of purchase, vendor, method of payment, current condition. I typed the second header, Timeline. I needed to reconstruct the last 5 years. Every mortgage payment I made, every utility bill I covered, every repair I funded, the new water heater in 2021, the roof patch in 2019. I would pull the bank statements. I would find the digital footprints. I typed the third header, Proof. This was the most important column. Receipts, warranties, emails, text messages where my mother thanked me for the transfer, voicemails where my father apologized for being short on cash again. They thought they were kicking a roommate out. They thought they were bullying a daughter. They did not realize they were declaring war on a creditor who kept impeccable records. I stared at the blinking cursor. The timeline of Brianna's return did not sit right. She comes back, flaunts money, and suddenly the parents who were terrified of the bank are confident enough to kick out their financial lifeline. It meant they had found a new source of money. Or they thought they had. I would find out who wrote Brianna's script. But first, I had to secure my inventory. I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was now 5:45 in the morning. I had 47 hours and 15 minutes left. I picked up my phone and opened the camera roll. I walked to my bedroom door and opened it quietly. The hallway was empty. I could hear the low murmur of voices from the kitchen, Brianna's sharp laugh, my mother's nervous tittering. They were celebrating. Good. Let them drink their coffee. I stepped out into the hallway, raised my phone, and switched it to video mode. I started recording. I would document every square inch of this house. I would document the scratches on the floor. I would document the serial numbers on the back of the electronics. I would document the truth before they had a chance to rewrite it. The floorboard outside my door creaked under my weight. It was the same board that always creaked, but this time, I did not step off it. I pressed down harder, letting the house speak. I am still here, it seemed to say, and I am watching. I locked my bedroom door. It was a flimsy barrier against the people outside. But it bought me the psychological space I needed to shift from daughter to auditor. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my laptop balancing on my knees, and began the categorization process. This was not about packing. Packing is physical. This was about legal definition. I needed to separate the house into 3 distinct territories. There was the property that belonged to my parents, which was mostly old furniture from the 90s that smelled of lemon polish and denial. There was the property that belonged to Grandpa Warren, the heavy hand-hewn pieces that felt like they had souls, which I would leave behind because taking them would give my family ammunition to call me a thief. And then there was the third category, the things I had purchased, the things that made the house functional, comfortable, and modern. I opened a fresh spreadsheet tab. I started listing items with the speed of someone who had memorized her credit card statements. The Dyson vacuum cleaner in the hall closet, the Le Creuset Dutch oven in the kitchen, specifically the flame-colored one, the robotic lawnmower sitting in the garage charging station, the high thread count sheets on the guest bed where Miles was currently sleeping off his hangover. I listed them all. I did not care about the resale value. I cared about the principle. Every item on that list represented hours of my life. Hours I had traded for a paycheck while my sister was off finding herself and my parents were hiding from their financial reality. Once the list was complete, I moved to the documentation phase. I picked up my phone again. The video I had started in the hallway was just a warm-up. Now, I needed forensic quality. I opened an app that stamped the date, time, and GPS coordinates directly onto the footage. I moved through my bedroom first, filming the empty drawers I had already begun to clear, then the pristine condition of the walls. I wanted proof that I was not damaging the property. If they tried to claim I punched holes in the drywall or ripped up the carpet in a fit of rage, I would have a high-definition rebuttal ready to go. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. I peered through the blinds and saw my father's car backing out of the driveway. My mother was likely with him, escaping the house to avoid the awkwardness of the morning. Brianna and Miles were probably still asleep or lounging in the master suite, acting like royalty. I slipped out of my room. I moved through the house like a ghost. I filmed the living room, zooming in on the serial number of the television. I filmed the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to show the pristine shelves, documenting the model number of the appliance itself. I filmed the washer and dryer, capturing the lack of scratches or dents. I narrated softly as I went, stating the date and the ownership status of each item. It felt cold, doing this to the place I had lived for 3 decades, but warmth was a luxury I could no longer afford. Back in my room, I turned my attention to the digital excavation. I logged into my email and searched for keywords: order confirmation, invoice, receipt, warranty. My inbox was a graveyard of transactions. I found the email from the appliance store dated 3 years ago. I found the Amazon orders for the smart home hub and the security cameras. I found the digital receipt for the expensive ergonomic office chair my father used in the den. I connected my laptop to the wireless printer in the hallway. I hesitated for a second, wondering if the noise would wake Brianna. Then I hit print. The machine whirred to life, a rhythmic, mechanical sound that felt strangely like a heartbeat. I printed everything, 2 copies, one for me and one for the lawyer I knew I would eventually need. The stack of warm paper grew on the output tray, a physical manifestation of my financial leverage. Now came the logistics. I could not move a refrigerator by myself. I needed professionals, and I needed them fast. I searched for local moving companies, skipping the big national chains that required weeks of lead time. I found a company called Blue Ridge Relocation with a 5-star rating and a review that mentioned they were discreet. I dialed the number. A man answered on the second ring. "Blue Ridge, this is Noah." His voice was clear, alert, and devoid of the fake customer service cheer that usually grated on my nerves. "I need a full crew for a move-out," I said, keeping my voice low. 3-bedroom house, but I'm only taking specific items: major appliances, electronics, living room furniture. I need it done quickly and quietly. Noah did not miss a beat. He did not ask for a survey. He asked the only question that mattered. "You need us today or tomorrow?" "Today," I said. Noon. Noon was strategic. My parents usually went to a lunch diner on Tuesdays. Brianna and Miles would likely be awake but sluggish, or perhaps out exploring the town they thought they now owned. Noon was the transition hour, the time when shadows were shortest and visibility was highest. "I can have a truck and 3 guys there at 12 sharp," Noah said. "We charge an hourly rate for rush jobs." I gave him the address and my credit card number. "One more thing," I added. "I need a manifest. I need every item you load to be logged and signed off. This is a separation of property situation." "Understood," Noah said. "We will bring the clipboards. We will be in and out before anyone knows the difference." I hung up and felt a surge of adrenaline. The clock was ticking down. I had roughly 6 hours until the truck arrived. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out a roll of blue painter's tape and a stack of neon yellow Post-it notes. I took a thick black marker and wrote 2 words on the first note: "My property." I wrote it again and again. My handwriting was jagged, sharp. I stripped off a piece of tape, stuck the note to it, and walked out into the hall. I pasted the label onto the side of the hallway console table I had bought at an estate sale. I walked into the bathroom and stuck a label on the heated towel rack I had installed last winter. It was petty, it was aggressive, but it was also a boundary. I was physically claiming the space, marking my territory in a way they could not ignore. If Brianna walked past and saw a neon yellow note on the television, She would know exactly what was happening. She would know that the 48-hour clock she set was not a countdown to my eviction, but a countdown to her loss. Finally, I returned to my room and pulled a small fireproof safe from the back of my closet. This was my fail-safe. I took the freshly printed stack of invoices and receipts and placed them inside. I pulled a backup hard drive from my desk, one that contained a mirror image of my laptop's data, and placed it on top of the papers. I locked the safe and spun the dial. If they cut the power, I had the papers. If they smashed my laptop, I had the hard drive. If they tried to physically stop me, I had the police on speed dial and a moving crew of 3 strong men arriving in a few hours. I sat back on my heels and looked at the safe. It looked like a black metal brick. It was heavy, ugly, and absolutely necessary. I was not just packing boxes, I was building a fortress. And at noon, I was going to lower the drawbridge and march out with everything that was mine. 12 o'clock arrived with the mechanical hiss of air brakes. I was standing by the front window, peeling back the curtain just an inch. The Blue Ridge relocation truck was a massive white box on wheels, and as it idled at the curb, it blocked out the view of the neighbor's manicured lawn. It looked like an ambulance for a dying house. Noah was the first one out. He looked exactly as he sounded on the phone. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a navy blue uniform that was tucked in with military precision. He carried a clipboard and walked up the driveway with a stride that suggested he charged by the minute. I opened the door before he could knock. "We are here for the extraction," Noah said. He did not call it a move. He looked past me at the hallway, his eyes landing on the first neon yellow post-it note I had stuck to the console table. "Is that the tagging system yellow goes?" I said, "Anything without a tag stays." Noah nodded once. He signaled to the 2 men behind him. They were younger, wearing back braces and gloves. They did not smile. They did not ask about the weather. They simply walked in and began to dismantle the life I had subsidized. The efficiency was terrifying. They started in the living room. The first thing to go was the 65-inch television. One man unhooked it from the wall mount with a power drill that whined in the silence of the house. In under 2 minutes, the wall was bare, leaving behind a rectangle of lighter paint where the dust had not settled. It looked like a scar. Next was the sectional sofa. This was the centerpiece of the room, the place where my father fell asleep after dinner, the place where Brianna had likely sat last night, planning my eviction. The movers separated the sections with practiced ease. They flipped the pieces onto dollies and wheeled them out the door. The sound of the rubber wheels rolling over the hardwood floor was a low rumble, like distant thunder. I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, checking items off my printed list as they passed me. Sony television, loaded. Sectional sofa, gray tweed, loaded. Sonos soundbar, loaded. They moved into the kitchen. I watched them unplug the microwave. I watched them wrap the high-end blender in bubble wrap. Then they went for the refrigerator. This was the most violent part of the process. They had to empty it first. I had provided 2 large coolers. They shoveled the condiments, the milk, and the leftovers into the coolers and set them on the floor. Then they pulled the fridge out of its alcove. The compressor hummed one last time before they pulled the plug. The silence that followed was heavy. One of the movers, a guy with a tattoo on his neck, paused by the dining area. He looked at the massive farmhouse table. It was scarred and heavy, built from timber that had once been alive in a forest my grandfather loved. It had a yellow note on it, but the tape was peeling slightly. "This one too," he asked, grabbing a corner to test the weight. I looked at the table. I remembered sitting under it during thunderstorms when I was 6. I remembered Grandpa Warren sanding the edges so I would not get splinters. It was the heart of the house. "No," I said, "leave that." The mover looked confused. "But it has a tag." I walked over and peeled the yellow note off. The adhesive left a tiny residue on the wood. "That is not mine," I said. "I do not take what I did not pay for, and I do not take memories. I was not stealing their history. I was not stealing their heritage. I was reclaiming my capital. If they wanted to eat dinner on Grandpa's table, they could, but they would have to sit on the floor to do it. Because the dining chairs were mine. I nodded to the mover. "Take the chairs. Leave the table." He shrugged and hoisted 2 chairs at a time. Next, they went to the laundry room. The disconnection of the washer and dryer was loud. Water dripped from the hoses into a bucket. The metal venting clattered as it was pulled from the wall. These were machines of convenience. My mother hated going to the laundromat. She viewed it as a failure of status. By tonight, she would be intimately familiar with the location of the nearest coin-operated facility. In 2 hours, the house was transformed. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a stage set after the play had closed. The living room was a cavern of echoes. The mounting brackets for the TV stuck out of the wall like ribs. The kitchen alcove gaped open, dark and dusty where the fridge had been. The air purifier was gone, so the air already felt stagnant. Noah walked up to me with the clipboard. He tapped the paper with a pen. "That is everything on the list," he said. We left the heavy wooden table and the bedroom sets. "You did not tag." "Sign here." I took the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name, Kayla Mitchell, with a flourish I did not know I possessed. I took my phone out and snapped a high-resolution photo of the signed manifest. I photographed the timestamp on Noah's watch. I photographed the empty rooms, ensuring the background showed no damage to the walls or floors. "I am not liable for any scratches found after this timestamp," I said to Noah. He nodded. "Standard procedure. We are clear." I watched the truck pull away. The street was empty again. I was alone in the shell of the house. I walked back to the dining table. It looked lonely without the chairs. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house key. It was a brass key with a blue plastic cap. I had carried it for 5 years. I placed it gently in the exact center of the table. The metal made a sharp clink against the wood. It was a resignation letter. It was a final period at the end of a long, run-on sentence. I did not write a note. I did not leave cash for groceries. I picked up my laptop bag and walked out the front door. I did not lock it. I did not care who walked in next. It was not my job to secure the perimeter anymore. I drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away, a place with industrial lighting and strong espresso. I ordered a large black coffee and found a table in the corner. I opened my laptop. First, I logged into a booking site. I found a serviced apartment in downtown Eugene, a studio with exposed brick and a view of the river. It was expensive, $3,000 a month, but I booked it for 2 weeks. I needed a fortress, and I was willing to pay for the moat. Next, I opened my phone settings. I went to the contact list. Mom, Dad, Brianna. I did not block them. Blocking them would mean I would miss the evidence of their reaction. Instead, I set their ringtones to silent. I turned off vibration. I routed their texts to a separate folder that would not trigger a notification on my home screen. I looked at the time on my laptop. 2:30 in the afternoon. Brianna and Miles would be returning soon. They would probably be carrying takeout bags or shopping bags, laughing about how they had won. They would put the key in the lock. They would open the door expecting to see the spoils of their war. Instead, they would find an echo. They would find the darker patches on the floor where the rugs used to be. They would find the silence. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. The 48-hour clock was still ticking, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the one waiting to be evicted. I was the audience. The curtain was about to go up on the second act, and for the first time in my life, I was not responsible for the performance. I did not wait for them to call. I waited for them to realize that the house they had stolen was just a box, and without me, it was an empty one. My phone began to seize on the cafe table about 40 minutes after the moving truck had departed. It started with a single vibration, a low hum against the laminate surface, but within seconds, it transformed into a continuous, frantic dance. I watched the screen light up, darken, and light up again. The names flashed like a scrolling ticker of my past life. Mom, Dad, Brianna, Mom again, Aunt Linda, who I had not spoken to since Christmas 2 years ago. Even a cousin from Portland. The network was active. The gossip had traveled faster than fiber optics. I did not touch the device. I simply sipped my coffee, which had gone lukewarm, and watched the notifications stack up on the lock screen. I had set the phone to silent, so there was no ringtone to disturb the other patrons working on their screenplays or studying for exams. There was just the visual evidence of a family imploding. I waited until the screen finally went dark for a full minute before I reached for it. I did not intend to answer. Answering was a tactical error. In a verbal argument, gaslighting is easy. Tone can be denied. Words can be twisted. But voicemails. Voicemails are permanent records. They are digital fingerprints of intent. I put my earbuds in and opened the voicemail tab. There were 7 new messages. I played Brianna's first. The timestamp was 3:12 in the afternoon. She must have just walked in. The audio quality was poor, likely because she was screaming into the phone while pacing. "The house is empty," she shrieked. Her voice cracked, losing its carefully curated sophistication. "You took everything. The TV, the sofa, the fridge. Kayla, are you insane? We walked in, and there is nothing here. There is nowhere to sit. There is no food. You cannot just strip the house like this. This is our house. Bring it back. Bring it back right now, or I swear to God." The message cut off. She must have hung up in a rage, or perhaps threw the phone. I noted the specific phrasing. She did not say "you stole my things." She said "you took everything," even in her fury. She knew she could not claim ownership of specific items. She was angry about the inconvenience, about the sudden removal of the luxury she felt entitled to. She had expected a turnkey palace. I had left her a drywall box. I pressed play on the next one. My mother, Kayla. Her voice was trembling, a mix of panic and performance. I could hear my father muttering something in the background. "I do not understand what is happening. We came home to celebrate with your sister and the house looks like a skeleton. How could you do this? We are your family. You are hurting Brianna. You are hurting us. This is betrayal. Kayla, pure betrayal. After everything we did for you, call us back. We need to fix this before the neighbors talk." I felt a cold tightness in my chest, but I breathed through it. Betrayal. The word hung in my ear canal. They had given me 48 hours to vacate the home I saved from foreclosure, yet I was the betrayer for taking my own property with me. The logic was twisted, a Mobius strip of narcissism where they were always the victims, regardless of the weapon they held. The third message was from my father. This one was different. He sounded breathless, as if his heart was racing. "Kayla, pick up the phone. You are making a mistake, a big mistake. You cannot just take the appliances. Those are fixtures." Miles is furious. He says this is theft. He says people get sued for this. What are you doing? Just bring the truck back. We can talk about the rent. Maybe you can stay in the guest room for a week. Just bring the stuff back. I paused the playback. Sued. My father, a man who crumbled at the sight of a past due notice, was suddenly throwing around legal threats and the offer to let me stay in the guest room. It was pathetic. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog, expecting gratitude. But I was not starving anymore. I did not call them back. I opened my messaging app and scrolled to a contact named Tessa Ward. Tessa was my best friend since college, but more importantly, she was a shark in a pencil skirt. She practiced property law in downtown Eugene and had a low tolerance for nonsense. We had discussed this possibility over wine months ago. As a hypothetical, today, the hypothetical had teeth. I typed a simple message. The curtain has risen. 3 dots appeared instantly. Tessa was waiting. Her reply came through a moment later. "I am prepping the files now. Do not answer them. Do not text them. If they show up at your office, leave. Silence is your shield." I exhaled. I was not alone. I had a general on my flank. I went back to the voicemail list. There were more from Brianna, more from Mom, but I skipped them. They would just be variations on the same hysterical theme. But the last message caught my eye. It was from a number I did not recognize, a local area code, but not a contact I had saved. I pressed play. The voice was male, deep, and clipped. It sounded like it belonged to a man wearing a tie that was too tight. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Arthur Sterling. I represent your parents and your sister. Brianna, I have been informed of the situation regarding the removal of assets from the property this afternoon. We need to discuss the immediate return of these items to avoid further escalation. I advise you to return my call immediately at this number." The message ended with a sterile click. I sat very still. The noise of the coffee shop, the grinding of beans, the indie folk music, the chatter of students faded into a dull buzz. Arthur Sterling. I knew the name. He was a real estate attorney in town, not a cheap one. My mind began to race, connecting the dots that I had previously missed. Brianna had arrived at 5 in the morning. She had given me a specific 48-hour timeline. And now, less than 4 hours after I had vacated the house, a lawyer was already calling me claiming to represent the family. You do not hire a lawyer in 4 hours. You do not get a retainer signed, a conflict check cleared, and a strategy meeting finished in the time it takes to realize a sofa is missing. This was premeditated. They had hired Arthur Sterling days ago, maybe weeks ago. The eviction was not an emotional outburst from Brianna. It was a calculated legal maneuver. They had planned to kick me out, and they had lined up a lawyer to handle the fallout if I refused to leave. They had anticipated a fight. They just hadn't anticipated that I would not fight for the house, but rather that I would strip the house of its value. The realization made my blood run cold. My parents, who claimed they were broke, who claimed they needed me to pay the mortgage, had somehow found the money to pay a retainer to Arthur Sterling. Or perhaps Brianna had paid him with money she claimed she didn't have. They were not just ungrateful, they were conspirators. I looked at the phone in my hand. It felt heavier now, like a grenade with the pin pulled. My father's panic about me being sued wasn't just fear. It was because they had already discussed litigation strategies. They were ready to crush me legally if I didn't comply with their demands. I copied the number for Arthur Sterling and switched back to my text thread with Tessa. I pasted the number and added a note. They have a lawyer, Arthur Sterling. He just left a voicemail. They must have retained him before today. Tessa's reply was immediate. Sterling is a pit bull, but he is expensive. If they have him, they have funding. This just got interesting. Do not call him. I will call him. Send me the recording. I forwarded the voicemail file to Tessa. I looked out the window of the coffee shop. The rain had started again, streaking the glass with gray tears. I thought about my parents sitting in that empty living room, the lawyer on speakerphone, plotting against the daughter who had kept them warm for 5 years. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of clarity. The emotional fog was gone. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was the defendant, and they had made a critical error. They assumed the defendant was helpless. I closed my laptop. I had a hotel to check into. I had a new life to arrange. And I had a war to win. I was not going to call Arthur Sterling. I was going to let Tessa talk to him. And while they argued over sofas and televisions, I was going to dig into the one question that mattered most. Where did the money for the lawyer come from? The office of Tessa Ward was a study in aggressive minimalism. It was located on the 4th floor of a glass and steel building downtown, a place where the air was filtered to a crisp 68 degrees, and the silence was heavy enough to weigh on your shoulders. It smelled of fresh printer paper and sanitizing wipes. This was where emotions came to die, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of statutes and clauses. I sat in a leather chair that was slightly too firm, watching Tessa spread my documents across her mahogany desk. She adjusted her glasses, the light from the window reflecting off the lenses. Hiding her eyes for a moment, she looked less like my college roommate and more like a surgeon preparing to cut. This is thorough, Tessa said, tapping a fingernail on the manifest Noah had signed. You have receipts, serial numbers, and a chain of custody signed by a licensed moving company. Arthur Sterling can scream all he wants about theft, but this is a civil dispute over personal property if he tries to file a police report. I will show them this binder. The police will take one look at the paperwork, call it a domestic squabble, and walk away. You are safe from criminal charges. Kayla, I felt my shoulders drop an inch. The immediate threat of handcuffs was gone, but the knot in my stomach remained. I was not there just to defend myself against an accusation of stealing a sofa. I was there because the numbers in my head were not balancing. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool surface of her desk. "Tessa," I said, "there is something else. When I asked about the mortgage this morning, the room died. My father looked like he was about to have a stroke. And Brianna. She was too confident. She is not a planner. She does not know real estate law. But she walked in with a 48-hour deadline and a lawyer on speed dial. Why would they be so terrified of me mentioning a loan if they are the rightful owners?" Tessa stopped shuffling the papers. She looked at me, her expression shifting from advocate to investigator. "Fear usually means exposure," she said. "If they are scared of the mortgage talk, it means the mortgage is either in default, which we know it was, or there is something about the title they do not want you to see." She turned to her computer. The screen was a large, curved monitor that glowed with the interface of the county recorder's database. "Let us look at the public record," she said. "If it is recorded in Lane County, it is on this screen." I watched her type in my parents' names: Alan Boyd, Marjorie Boyd. She filtered for property records. The clicking of her mouse was the only sound in the room. "Here is the deed history," Tessa muttered, her eyes scanning the lines of data. "Transfer from Warren Mitchell to Alan and Marjorie Boyd in 2015. That lines up. Then we have the first mortgage. Then the second mortgage, the predatory one you told me about. Then the lien release when you paid the arrears." She paused. Her hand froze on the mouse. "That is odd," she said softly. "What is it I asked?" Tessa squinted at the screen. "There is an entry here from 6 months ago." She said, "It is a quitclaim deed, but it is not a full transfer. It is a modification of tenancy." She clicked to open the document image. A PDF loaded slowly, line by line. "The current owner of record is not just Alan and Marjorie Boyd," Tessa said, her voice tightening. "There is a third party listed on the title, a tenant in common with a 50% stake." I stood up and walked around the desk to look at the screen. I expected to see a bank. I expected to see a loan shark. I did not recognize the name. It was not a bank. It was an LLC, Obsidian Ventures. I have never heard of them. I said, "My parents never mentioned selling half the house." Tessa frowned. "You do not sell half a house to an LLC unless you are in deep trouble, or unless you are hiding assets. But look at the signature date. It was 6 months ago. That is exactly when Brianna came back to town. Isn't it?" The timeline clicked into place like a deadbolt sliding home. Brianna returns. The house ownership changes. And now, I am evicted. Tessa opened another tab. She was typing furiously now. "I am going to pull the articles of incorporation for Obsidian Ventures." She said, "But Kayla, this looks like a trust structure or a shell company. If your parents signed over half the house, they do not have the authority to kick you out unilaterally. More importantly, if that transfer happened while you were paying the mortgage, they might have committed fraud against you. You were paying down a debt on an asset they were actively diluting." I stared at the digitized signature of my father on the screen. It looked shaky. I suddenly remembered a moment from my childhood. I must have been 10 years old. Grandpa Warren was measuring my height against the doorframe of the kitchen pantry. He had used a pencil to mark the line, then looked down at me with his steel blue eyes. "This house is not just wood and nails. Kayla," he had said, "it is a promise. It will belong to the one who keeps their word." My father had broken his word. My mother had broken hers. And now, it seemed they had broken the law. Tessa spun her chair around to face me. The cold professional was gone, replaced by a fierce protector. "This is not a landlord-tenant dispute anymore," she said. "This is probate fraud or elder financial abuse. I need you to get me everything you have on your grandfather. I need his full legal name, his date of death, the funeral home records, and most importantly, any copy of a will or trust you ever saw. Even if it was just a draft, even if it was an email." Why, I asked. "Because," Tessa said, lowering her voice, People do not create secret LLCs and transfer deeds in the dark unless they are trying to bypass a legitimate claim. If your grandfather left that house to them fair and square, they would not need to hide behind a shell company. I bet if we dig into the probate records from when Warren died, we are going to find that the transfer to your parents in 2015 was not as clean as they pretended. I nodded. My throat felt dry. I had walked into this office thinking I was fighting for my dignity. Now I realized I was fighting for a legacy. I gathered my empty folder. The receipts for the sofa and the TV seemed trivial now. Those were just things. This was about the ground beneath our feet. "Get me the death certificate," Tessa ordered. "And Kayla, do not sleep at a friend's house. Go to a hotel. If they have gone to this length to hide the ownership, and they know you are digging, they might get desperate." I walked out of the building into the gray afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with the smell of wet pavement. I looked at the text on my phone. My mother had sent another message. "Please just call us. We are family." I deleted it. They were not family. They were suspects, and I was not the daughter anymore. I was the witness who had just found the first drop of blood on the floor. The phone call from Tessa Ward came at 7 in the morning. I was awake, staring at the beige ceiling of my hotel room, listening to the hum of the mini-fridge. I had not slept well. The silence of the hotel was different from the silence of the house. It was impersonal, transient. When my phone vibrated, I expected another hysterical voicemail from Brianna or a threat from Arthur Sterling, but it was Tessa. And for the first time in the 10 years I had known her, she did not sound like a lawyer. She sounded like a woman who had just watched someone kick a dog. "Get to my office," she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a suppressed fury that frightened me more than her shouting would have. "Do not stop for coffee. Do not pass go. Just get here. Kayla, what I am looking at makes me want to burn the Oregon State Bar Association to the ground." I was dressed and out the door in 10 minutes. The morning air in Eugene was crisp, smelling of damp pine and exhaust. I drove my sedan with white-knuckled precision, my mind racing through scenarios. Had they sued me? Had they destroyed the house? Had they hurt themselves to frame me when I walked into Tessa's office? The atmosphere had shifted from the sterile chill of yesterday. The blinds were drawn tight, blocking out the gray morning light. The only illumination came from her desk lamp and the glow of her dual monitors. The desk itself, usually an expanse of polished mahogany, was covered in paper, but not just any paper. These were old documents, yellowing at the edges. Photocopies of microfiche records that smelled faintly of ozone and dust. Tessa was not sitting. She was standing behind her chair, gripping the headrest so hard the leather creaked. When she saw me, she did not say hello. She simply pointed a finger at a single document resting in the center of the desk. "Look at it," she commanded. I walked over. It was a scanned copy of a legal document. The header was in an old serif font, the kind typewriters used 30 years ago. "Last Will and Testament of Warren James Mitchell." I frowned. "My parents told me Grandpa died intestate." I said, "They said there was no will, so everything went to them by default as the next of kin. That was why the probate took so long." "That is a lie," Tessa spat. The word hung in the air like a weapon. "They lied to you. They lied to the bank. And they lied to the court." She reached over and flipped the page to the section marked Article 4, Disposition of Real Property. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the dense legal paragraph. The legalese was thick, but the names were clear. "I hereby devise and bequeath my real property, located at 442 Cedar Ridge Drive, Eugene, Oregon, to my granddaughter, Kayla Marie Mitchell, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday, at which time the title shall transfer fully and completely to her sole ownership." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the desk. "Read the date," Tessa said. I looked at the bottom of the page. The signature was my grandfather's, bold, jagged, familiar. The date was 3 years before he died. I looked up at Tessa, my vision blurring slightly. "Wait, if this is real?" "It is real," Tessa interrupted. I found it in the archives of the firm that bought out Grandpa's old lawyer's practice. It was filed. It exists. Then, I whispered. Then you have owned that house for 7 years. Tessa finished. Since you turned 25, you did not just save the house from foreclosure. Kayla, you were paying a mortgage that your parents took out on a property they did not own. They have been living in your house. They have been sleeping in your bedrooms. And yesterday, they evicted the landlord. I felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal I had felt yesterday was emotional. This was structural. This was a theft so massive, so prolonged, that it reshaped my entire adult life. Every time my father looked humble and asked for help, he knew. Every time my mother cried about losing her legacy, she knew the legacy was already mine. But that is not all, Tessa said. Her voice dropped, becoming even colder. She shuffled the papers and pulled out a second sheet. It was an attachment, labeled Codicil A. There is a reason Obsidian Ventures is involved, she said. I did the title search on the adjacent lots like you asked. It turns out, your grandfather's property has something unique. It holds a historic easement, a right-of-way access to the undeveloped forest land behind the subdivision. I stared at the map she pointed to. A thin red line ran through the backyard of my house, cutting right past the old oak tree, leading into the dense woods behind us. That land behind us is just scrub. I said. It was scrub, Tessa corrected. Until 6 months ago. The city council just rezoned it for a luxury condominium development, but the developers cannot build the access road from the main highway because of wetlands. They need a secondary access point. They need your backyard. I pieced it together. Obsidian Ventures. The sudden reappearance of Brianna. The pressure to get me out. They are selling the easement. I said, they are selling the access rights for a fortune. Tessa said, Obsidian Ventures is likely a holding company for the developers. Your parents and Brianna are sitting on a gold mine, but there is one problem. They cannot sell the easement if they do not own the land. And according to this will, they do not own the land. You do? So how did they get the deed, I asked. How is their name on the county records? Tessa pulled out the final document. This one looked different. It was newer. It was an affidavit of heirship, filed 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral. This is the smoking gun. Tessa said. I looked at the document. It was a sworn statement declaring that Warren Mitchell died without a will and that his sole heirs were Alan and Marjorie Boyd. It was signed by my father, and it was notarized. But look at the timestamp, Tessa pointed out. She tapped the stamp from the county clerk's office. It was filed at 4:55 in the afternoon on a Friday. And look at this. She pointed to a faint, handwritten note in the margin of the scanned copy. Correction to file per A. Boyd request. Tessa looked me dead in the eye. Someone went into the records office after the initial filing. Kayla, there is a digital footprint of a modification made to the probate file 3 years ago, right around the time they took out the second mortgage. They didn't just hide the will, they actively suppressed it. They filed a false affidavit stating no will existed, so they could transfer the deed to themselves. Then, when they needed to refinance, they likely had to patch up the paperwork to satisfy the bank. She leaned back, crossing her arms. This is not a family dispute anymore. Kayla, filing a false instrument with a government office is a felony. Obtaining a mortgage on property you do not own is bank fraud. If we walk into a courtroom with this, we are not asking for your sofa back. We are asking the district attorney to indict your parents. I sank into the leather chair. The image of my father standing in the kitchen, knuckles white on his coffee cup, flashed in my mind. He hadn't been scared of me leaving. He had been scared of prison. So, I said, my voice sounding hollow, Brianna came back because they told her about the deal with Obsidian. She thinks she is getting a payout from the developers. Exactly, Tessa said. They probably promised her a cut of the easement sale if she helped them clear the house. They needed you out because the developers probably want to send surveyors in, or maybe even start breaking ground, if you were there. You would ask questions. You would see the contracts. They needed the house empty so they could finalize the theft. I looked at the stack of papers. It was a mountain of evidence. It was the story of my life, rewritten as a crime novel. What do we do? I asked. Tessa smiled. It was a terrifying, razor-sharp smile. We do not call them, she said. We do not warn them. We let them think they have won. We let them sign the papers with Obsidian Ventures. Because once they sign that contract claiming they own the land, they have committed the final act of fraud. She reached for her phone. I am going to draft a lis pendens, she said. It is a legal notice filed with the county that says there is a pending lawsuit regarding the title of the property. It effectively freezes the asset. No one can buy it, sell it, or finance it while the notice is active. I will file it this afternoon. She looked at me, and then, Kayla, we are going to file a petition to reopen your grandfather's probate. We are going to drop a nuclear bomb on their little victory parade. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there, my family was likely popping champagne, thinking they had erased me. They thought I was a data analyst who had been outmaneuvered. They forgot one thing. A data analyst does not stop until the equation balances. Do it, I said to the glass. File it. I turned back to Tessa. But I want to be the one to serve them. I said, when the time comes, I want to see their faces. Tessa nodded. You will. But first, we let them dig the hole a little deeper. I walked out of the office, but I did not go back to the hotel. I went to the public library. I needed to print more documents. I needed to see the zoning maps myself. The sadness was gone, entirely replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had stolen my past. They had tried to steal my future, but they had made the mistake of leaving the paper trail in the present, and I was going to follow it all the way to the end. The courier envelope that Tessa sent was not thick, but it was heavy with consequence. It arrived at the house on Cedar Ridge Drive at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, requiring a signature. I was not there to see it, but I could imagine the scene. My father, likely nursing a coffee and a migraine, signing for the package, expecting perhaps a final utility bill or a notice from the movers. Instead, he opened a certified letter that dismantled his entire reality. The letter contained two distinct sections. The first was a curt, professional demand for the confirmation of my personal property, the sofa, the television, the appliances attaching the manifest Noah had signed, as proof that I had taken only what was mine. That was the jab. The second section was the knockout punch. It was a formal notice of claim regarding the real estate itself, attaching a copy of Grandpa Warren's will and the filed lis pendens. It stated, in unequivocal legal language, that the house they were currently occupying and the land they were attempting to sell to Obsidian Ventures belonged to me. The reaction was nuclear. My phone, which had been relatively quiet since I blocked their calls, began to light up with voicemail notifications. They were bypassing the block by calling from neighbors' phones, from landlines I did not recognize. I sat in Tessa's office, listening to one of them on speaker. It was my mother. She was not crying this time. She was screaming, "You ungrateful child!" She shrieked, the audio distorting. "You think you can forge a will. You think you can steal our home with some paper you printed out. We are calling the police. We are calling everyone. You are dead to us." Tessa pressed the end call button with a calm, practiced finger. She then sent a single email to Arthur Sterling, copying my parents and Brianna. The body of the email was one sentence: all further communication must be directed to my office in writing. Any direct contact with my client will be considered harassment and added to the pending litigation. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 hours. Then, the strategy shifted. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Brianna. She must have used a burner app or a friend's phone because the number was unfamiliar. But the tone was unmistakable. "Kayla, please. Mom is hyperventilating. Dad is scared. We don't need lawyers. We are sisters. Can we just meet for coffee at the grind? Just you and me? No Miles. No parents. Let's work this out. I miss you." I stared at the screen. The manipulative brilliance of it was almost impressive. She was pivoting from the aggressor to the peacemaker in the span of an afternoon. She wanted a sit-down. She wanted to get me in a room. without Tessa, to guilt me, or perhaps to record me saying something they could use. It was a trap. I miss you. She missed the easement money. She missed the security of a house she didn't pay for. I did not reply to the text. I took a screenshot and emailed it to Tessa. Then I typed a reply. Not to the number, but to the air in front of me. Nice try. I sent a single text back to the number, send it through the lawyer. That was the door slamming shut. And because I refused to walk through it, they decided to try and kick it down. 2 days later, Arthur Sterling filed a motion in probate court. They were contesting the validity of the will. I sat in my hotel room, reading the digital copy of their filing. It was a masterpiece of fiction. They argued that the will Tessa found was a forgery, or alternatively, that Grandpa Warren had lacked testamentary capacity when he signed it. The document claimed my grandfather was suffering from advanced dementia in the years before his death. It claimed he was confused, frail, and easily manipulated. It painted a picture of a senile old man who had been tricked by his granddaughter into signing away the family inheritance. Reading it felt like a physical assault. They were not just attacking me. They were defiling the memory of the only person in that family who had ever possessed a spine. Grandpa Warren was sharp as a tack until the day his heart stopped. He did the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen. He remembered the batting averages of the entire 1995 Mariners lineup. To call him incompetent was a lie so offensive it made my hands shake. Tessa was ready. We do not argue with feelings. She told me over the phone. We argue with data. We subpoenaed Grandpa's medical records from his primary care physician, a doctor who had treated him for 20 years. The records were pristine. There was no diagnosis of dementia, no Alzheimer's. His mental status exams, conducted 6 months before he signed the will and 6 months after, showed he was fully oriented to time, place, and person. But Tessa had something better than medical charts. She found a video. It was from a town hall meeting, recorded by the local public access channel 3 months before Grandpa died. He had stood up to speak about a zoning change affecting the local park. We played the clip for the judge during the preliminary hearing. On the screen, Grandpa Warren stood tall, holding a microphone. His voice was gravelly but strong. He spoke for 5 minutes without notes. He cited specific city ordinances. He made a joke about the mayor's tie. He was lucid, commanding, and undeniably sane. I watched the lawyer, Arthur Sterling, shift uncomfortably in his suit. He knew. He looked at the video, then at the medical records, and he knew his clients had sold him a bill of goods. He had filed a motion based on the word of liars, and the evidence was making him look foolish. The judge, a woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many family feuds, paused the video. She looked over her glasses at the defense table. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dry, "the court finds the evidence regarding Mr. Mitchell's capacity to be quite compelling. This video does not show a man who did not know his own mind." She issued a temporary order. The will was to be treated as presumptively valid until a full trial could be held. The lis pendens would remain. The assets were frozen. Obsidian Ventures could not buy the easement. My parents could not sell the house. They could not even refinance to pay Sterling's legal fees. They were trapped in a house they did not own, fighting a war they could not afford, against a daughter they could not intimidate. That was when the flying monkeys arrived. It started that evening. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called me. I let it go to voicemail. "Kayla, honey, it is Aunt Linda. Your mother called me. She is devastated. She says you are trying to put them on the street. I know you are hurt, but you have to be the bigger person here. They are your parents. You only get one set of parents. God forgives. Kayla, you need to find it in your heart to forgive too." Then a cousin, then a second cousin. The script was identical. Be the bigger person. Family comes first. Do not ruin them over money. They were weaponizing the social fabric of our family. My mother was spinning a narrative where I was the vindictive monster and she was the martyr. She omitted the fraud. She omitted the secret sale of the easement. She omitted the fact that she had looked me in the eye for 5 years and let me pay for a house she stole. I did not argue with any of them. I did not text back explaining the legal nuances of probate fraud. I did not try to clear my name. I simply saved every voicemail. I took screenshots of every guilt-tripping text. I uploaded them to the secure folder shared with Tessa. They were trying to shame me into submission. They thought that if they made me feel like a bad daughter, I would drop the lawsuit. They thought I was motivated by anger, and that anger could be cooled with guilt. They were wrong. I lay in bed that night, listening to the rain hit the hotel window. I was not angry. Anger is hot. Anger burns out. What I felt was the cold, heavy weight of necessity. They were not afraid of my anger. They were afraid of the light. They were afraid that if I kept pulling the thread, the whole tapestry of their respectability would unravel. They were afraid that the neighbors, the church members, and the family would find out that the Boyds were not victims, but grifters who had preyed on their own child. I turned off my phone. Let them call. Let them scream. The judge had spoken. The timeline was set, and I was not going anywhere. The night before the trial, the air in my hotel room felt thin, charged with the static of an approaching storm. I was steaming a blouse for court, the hiss of the iron the only sound in the room. When my laptop chimed, it was not a text. It was a priority notification from Tessa's secure server. I abandoned the iron and sat at the desk. Tessa had forwarded me an email she had received 11 minutes ago. The sender address was a string of random alphanumeric characters. A burner account created to vanish. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only 6 words. They did not do it alone. Attached to the email was a single image file. It was a photograph of a document, taken hurriedly in low light, perhaps on a kitchen counter or inside a car. The paper was creased, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. I clicked to enlarge it. It was a memorandum of understanding, dated 2 months prior. It was not a formal legal contract drawn up by Arthur Sterling. It was cruder. It outlined a finder's fee structure regarding the sale of the easement rights to Obsidian Ventures. It stated that upon the successful vacancy of the property and the execution of the sale, a cash commission of $15,000 would be paid to the facilitator. At the bottom of the page, in blue ink, was a signature I knew better than my own. Brianna Boyd. I stared at the screen. My sister had not come back to reclaim her childhood home. She had not come back to support our aging parents. She was a bounty hunter. She had been hired to clear the obstacle me for a $15,000 payout. That explained the 48-hour deadline. That explained the aggression. She was working on a commission schedule. But it was the second signature on the document that stopped my heart. The signature of the payer was not Arthur Sterling. It was not a representative from Obsidian Ventures. It was a scrawl I recognized from church potlucks and 4th of July barbecues. Gary Vance. I picked up my phone and called Tessa immediately. She answered on the first ring. I see it, she said. Her voice was tight. Gary Vance. I said, the family friend, the financial planner who goes golfing with my dad every Sunday. He is not just a golf buddy. Tessa said, I just ran a background check on him the second I saw the email. Kayla. Do you remember the bad investment your parents made 5 years ago? The one that wiped out their savings and forced them to take out the second mortgage? I remember, I said. They said it was a private equity deal that went south. They never gave me the details. Tessa typed something on her end, the keys clacking loudly. It was a fund managed by Vance Capital. She said, Gary Vance sold them the bad deal. He lost their money. The room spun. The pattern finally completed itself, and it was more grotesque than I could have imagined. This was not just a story about a greedy sister and desperate parents. It was a loop. Gary Vance had drained my parents' retirement funds 5 years ago. He had created the desperation that forced them to mortgage the house, and now, 5 years later, he had returned with a solution. He probably told them about the developers. He probably told them he could fix everything, that he could make them rich again by selling the easement. But he needed the title clear. He needed the true owner out of the way. So he recruited Brianna. He used the daughter who needed money to evict the daughter who had the receipts. My parents were not just villains. They were marks. They were sheep who had been sheared by a wolf, and instead of admitting it, they had invited the wolf back into the pen to eat their young. This explained everything about my father. I closed my eyes and pictured him again in the kitchen. 5 a.m, staring at the floor. I had interpreted his fear as the fear of being caught in a lie about the will, but it was deeper than that. He was terrified because he knew he was trapped. He had likely signed documents with Gary Vance implicating himself in the fraud. He was not just afraid of losing the house. He was afraid of being exposed as a fool who had been conned twice by the same man. Miles was nothing. Miles was just the furniture Brianna brought with her. The real architect of my misery was a man who had sat at our dinner table and eaten my mother's pot roast while calculating how much equity he could squeeze out of us. "Tessa," I said, "does this change our strategy for tomorrow?" "No," Tessa said. "It sharpens it. We are not just going to prove the will is valid. We are going to subpoena Gary Vance. We are going to introduce this document as evidence of a conspiracy to defraud. We are going to show the judge that the motion to contest the will was funded and orchestrated by the very man standing to profit from the land sale." "Who sent the email?" I asked. Tessa paused. "I traced the IP to a cell tower in North Eugene," she said. "But the timing suggests it is someone who has access to the documents but got cold feet. Maybe Miles finally realized he was married to a shark. Or maybe Gary Vance has a disgruntled secretary. It does not matter. The document is admissible if we can authenticate the signature. And we can—" I hung up the phone. I looked at the wrinkled image of the agreement one last time. $15,000. That was the price tag Brianna had put on our sisterhood. That was the value of my 5 years of sacrifice. I turned off the laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Usually, the night before a trial is a time of anxiety. A plaintiff worries about the judge's mood, about the strength of the opening statement, but I felt a strange, heavy tranquility. I was not going to court to win a house. I could buy another house. I was going to court to perform an autopsy. I was going to cut open the body of lies my family had lived in for half a decade and show them the rot inside. I was going to force my father to look at Gary Vance and admit that he had sold his daughter to protect his pride. I laid out my clothes for the morning. A navy blue suit, a white silk blouse, shoes that did not make a sound when I walked. I wanted to look like the truth unadorned, serious, and inevitable. I climbed into the hotel bed. The sheets were cool. I did not toss and turn. I did not stare at the clock. When you have the truth in your pocket, you do not need to pray for luck. You do not need to dream of escape. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I needed the rest. Tomorrow, I had a funeral to attend, not for a person, but for the illusion of a family. The courtroom in the Lane County Circuit Court smelled of furniture polish and old anxiety. It was a smell I would forever associate with the final death of my childhood. My family sat on the left side of the aisle. They were dressed in their Sunday best, a tableau of respectable suburban grief. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. My father wore a suit that hung loosely on his frame, his eyes fixed on the seal of Oregon hanging behind the judge's bench. Brianna sat between them, looking fragile and wronged, while Miles fidgeted in the row behind, checking his watch as if he had a better place to be. I sat on the right, beside me. Tessa Ward was a statue of calm. She did not look at them. She arranged her binders on the table with geometric precision. We were not there to tell a sob story. We were there to balance the ledger. The trial began with Arthur Sterling attempting to paint a portrait of a family besieged. He described me as the ungrateful, estranged daughter who, in a fit of jealousy over her sister's return, had stripped the family home bare and concocted a forgery to evict her elderly parents. He used words like elder abuse and emotional distress. He was good. If I did not know the truth, I might have hated me too. Then Brianna took the stand. She performed well. She recounted the morning I left, describing the empty house as a scene of devastation. She claimed I had taken family heirlooms. She claimed I had taken items bought with our parents' money. She took everything. Brianna sobbed, her voice catching perfectly. We had to sleep on the floor. It was malicious. She just wanted to hurt us. Tessa stood up for cross-examination. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked to the projector and placed a document on the glass. "Ms. Boyd," Tessa said, "is this your signature on the moving manifest from Blue Ridge Relocation?" Brianna blinked, confused. "No, I never signed that." Tessa swapped the document. "This is the receipt for the Samsung television. The credit card used ends in 4092. Whose card is that?" "It is Kayla's," Brianna whispered. "And this receipt for the sectional sofa, and the washer, and the dryer." Tessa flipped through them, a rhythmic slap of paper on glass. "Every single item you claim was stolen has a corresponding invoice in my client's name. The moving company's manifest, signed by the foreman, confirms that only these specific items were removed. So when you say she took everything, you mean she took her property, correct?" Brianna looked at the jury, then at Sterling. She did not answer. The narrative of the thief began to crumble. But the real war was over the house. Sterling called my father to the stand. He looked small in the witness box. He stuck to the script. He claimed Grandpa Warren was confused in his final years, that he had promised the house to my parents verbally, that the will Tessa found was likely a draft he never intended to sign. "We just wanted to protect the family legacy," my father said, his voice trembling. "Kayla. She manipulated him." Tessa did not attack him immediately. She let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then she played the video. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. There was Grandpa Warren, 3 years before his death, standing at the town hall meeting. He looked strong. He sounded sharp. He spoke about the future of the neighborhood. "I built my house on Cedar Ridge for my granddaughter." Grandpa's voice boomed through the speakers, startling my mother. "I want her to inherit a neighborhood that is green, not a concrete jungle." Tessa paused the video. That was recorded 3 months before he died. Tessa said, "Does he sound confused to you, Mr. Boyd? Does he sound like a man who did not know his own mind?" My father gripped the railing. He did not answer. Tessa moved in for the kill. "You claim you wanted to protect the legacy," she said. "If that is true, why did you file an affidavit stating there was no will? Why did you hide the document that legally transferred the property to your daughter, and why? Mr. Boyd, did you take out a second mortgage on a house you knew, legally and morally, did not belong to you?" "I was trying to save us," my father shouted. Cracking under the pressure. "We were drowning," Tessa nodded. "And to save yourself, you decided to sell the easement to Obsidian Ventures. You decided to cash out an asset that wasn't yours." She turned back to her table and picked up the final piece of evidence, the image from the anonymous email. "Your Honor," Tessa said, addressing the judge, "we would like to submit Exhibit C. This is a memorandum of understanding signed by Brianna Boyd and Gary Vance." The air left the room. Brianna gasped audibly. Miles stopped fidgeting and went completely still. "This document," Tessa continued, "outlines a commission payment of $15,000 to Brianna Boyd upon the successful eviction of the current occupant, my client, and the sale of the easement rights. This was not a family dispute. This was a contract job. They needed Kayla Mitchell out of the house within 48 hours because they had a closing date with the developers. I watched my family. They did not look at me. They looked at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at the truth that was now projected on the screen for the court reporter to transcribe. The mask of the loving, victimized family had dissolved, revealing the machinery of greed beneath. The judge, the Honorable Justice Halloway, looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at my parents. Her expression was not angry. It was disappointed, which was somehow worse. She delivered her ruling from the bench. "The court finds the last will and testament of Warren Mitchell to be valid and binding. The property at 442 Cedar Ridge Drive belongs solely to Kayla Mitchell. The defendants are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days. She paused, looking over her glasses at my father. "Furthermore, regarding the fraudulent affidavit of heirship and the unauthorized encumbrance of the property, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review. You cannot mortgage what you do not own, Mr. Boyd." And you certainly cannot lie to a probate court to facilitate that theft. The gavel banged. It was a sharp, wooden sound, not unlike the closing of a door. I did not cheer. I did not smile. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, followed by a lightness I had not felt in years. It was the feeling of putting down a heavy suitcase that I had been carrying for someone else. I walked out of the courtroom. My family was huddled with Arthur Sterling, who looked like he was trying to calculate how to resign from the case. Brianna was crying, but this time the tears were real. She was looking at Miles, and he was shaking his head, backing away from her. The $15,000 was gone, the house was gone, and the marriage looked like it was next. My mother saw me. She took a step forward, her mouth opening, perhaps to guilt me one last time, perhaps to beg. I did not stop. I walked past them. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. In the weeks that followed, I did not move back into the house. I could not live there. The ghosts were too loud. Instead, I hired a contractor to repair the damage they had done. I listed the house for sale. I sold it to a young couple who reminded me of my grandparents. I used the money to pay off the fraudulent mortgage my parents had taken out not for them, but to clear the title, and I put the rest into a trust. My parents lost their standing in the community. The referral to the district attorney led to a plea deal that avoided jail time, but required restitution and public admission of guilt. The church gossip circles, once their lifeline, became their prison. Brianna moved to another state when Miles filed for divorce. They were free to live their lives, but they had to do it without my subsidy. 6 months later, it is 5 a.m. I am sitting in the kitchen of my new apartment. It is on the top floor of a building downtown, with a view of the river. The floors are polished concrete. The furniture is mine. The coffee in my mug is dark and hot. There is no one else here. The silence is not lonely. It is peaceful. I hear a noise in the hallway, but I do not flinch. It is just the building settling. No one is coming to take this from me. No one has a key to this door unless I give it to them. I open my laptop. The screen glows blue in the dim light. I have a new project starting at work today. The data is waiting to be analyzed. The patterns are waiting to be found. I take a sip of coffee. The bitter warmth spreads through my chest. I am Kayla Mitchell. I am 33 years old, and for the first time in my life, the ledger is balanced. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you are tuning in from, whether you are listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe with your own morning coffee. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people.